Yasis Thessaloniki. Milene Cheryl and Eucharisto for having me here. It's an honor to be amongst developers. Before I was a designer, I was a developer. My background is in computer science, so it's delightful to be among kindred spirits today. And what I'm here to talk to you about is not necessarily to sell you on the importance of hiring a designer. David did a wonderful job of doing that earlier. Our talks are complementary, and we didn't even call each other beforehand. But I'm here to try and go a little bit deeper for you and share some of my insights in an actionable way that you can use whether or not you are actually working with a designer or whether you're on your own. So as was mentioned, just a little bit about my background, since I have not met many of you folks. I am a designer with an interesting background. I have experience in software as a service, platform as a service, consumer hardware, cars, Alexa, the Echo Look, and even things like System Center Configuration Manager back in the day. So I've spanned a lot of different worlds. And so I'm here to talk to you about shifting the way you think about the software you're making. Because in your hands, you have the power to create almost anything. When I talk to my development partners and they tell me that something is impossible, my response is usually that it is possible, it just might be expensive. And you guys know how that goes. But I'm here today to talk about how we decide what to build in the first place and how we question that. And so the primary question I have to start is your product development glass half empty or half full? And I'm not sure this metaphor translates, but definitely in the United States, we talk about optimism versus pessimism. And we say that you can tell which one someone is by the way they refer to a glass that is up halfway with water. If someone calls that half full, they're optimistic. If someone calls that half empty, they're pessimistic. 20 years ago, design on the internet was one big worst-case scenario. And I'm not going to drag you through that. We've all been there. We've seen our sins. We've atoned for them. But when we were first confronted with experiences like this Yahoo site, that was when we first started to explore the importance of design thinking, human-centered design. And over the next 10 years or so, that led us to optimizing for common scenarios, like this internet connection wizard from the Microsoft Windows of old. And full disclosure, yes, I work at Microsoft now, but and designers of this age were encouraging you as developers to focus on the happy path. And now, within a few hours, we can spin up a site with a WordPress theme or with Node.js and a little bit of work, a site that's responsive, a site that scales between multiple devices. And it would be easy to say, well, haven't we solved all these problems? What role does design play now? What role does design thinking play as a developer when so much is free out of the box? And I appreciated when I went to go take these screenshots that they were Star Wars related. The nerdier, the better. So thank you, Disney, for making that very nerdy slide for me. But responsive design is just the tip of today's iceberg. And I know that you folks have lived in this world for many years and have been on the forefront. But responsive design was largely quantifiable. It was mathematics. It was breakpoints, screen sizes. And we've moved beyond that. Not all of your sites may be there today, but your customers are changing. And the way we have to approach design is changing too. We've been assuming for long enough that the glass is half full and that the optimistic approach is enough, that optimizing for the happy paths, for the most common scenarios, is enough to get us by. And I'm here to shift your focus a bit. I'm here to say that it's now time to start thinking about the edge cases. Glass half full optimism is not enough in a world that's increasingly complex. The stakes are higher than ever before. Our customers are coming to expect experiences that transcend the desktop, that transcend mobile experiences. This is an image of the Amazon device lineup. And I know that not all of these form factors are yet very common in some countries, partially because some companies start in the US first, but they're coming, and customers are changing. And folks will be at the forefront of a new movement. And artificial intelligence is changing the landscape of our customer engagement. David and I were talking earlier yesterday about sort of the difference between generations, particularly when it comes to the comfort level people have in contacting customer service or people from a store. Our parents' generation wanted to talk on the phone, and they will err whenever they can towards picking up that phone. Most of us are members of a generation that prefer websites, and we will do whatever we can to avoid talking to someone on the phone and using a website instead. But the generation after us has changed again. They have conversations. They're focused on text messages, on Snapchat, they sound like buzzwords, but there's something deeper there than just a couple of apps. The nature of engagement is changing, and it's conversational. Full disclosure, I'll be spending a lot of time on conversational interfaces in my line of work in the next few months. But I think this is especially going to impact those of you who are web developers, because conversational UI can show up anywhere. It can show up on a website, it can show up on a mobile site, and the younger our customers get, the more they will expect this kind of engagement. This image is from IBM Watson's virtual agent offering, and Microsoft has one, Amazon has one. Conversational agents are coming. And of course, GDPR brings a new level of back-end complexity and risk when it comes to tracking and learning about our customers. And I know we're probably all suffering from a little bit of post-traumatic stress syndrome when it comes to the GDPR rollout. Even in the United States, that was a huge deal for us at Microsoft. But when we talk about customer focus, one of our first defaults used to be tracking information about customers, just saving everything that they do and figuring out what we were going to learn from later. That's no longer safe or feasible. We have to be more thoughtful about how we approach, how we learn about our customers. All of this progress brings much higher stakes. Everything we do is more important than it's ever been, and our worst case is worse than ever. The glass isn't necessarily half full or half empty. It's broken. As technical complexity increases, so does the need for design engagement early in your product cycle. But I know many of you are smaller developers as well. You don't have unlimited resources. It can be hard to hire a designer. So what about you? How do you change the way you think about the products you make? Speaking about higher stakes for a moment, just to truly paint a picture about where we are. Our experiences are decentralized and therefore increasingly uncertain and unpredictable. This image is actually a screenshot from HBO's Silicon Valley series. And the latest season actually deals with cryptocurrency and blockchain. And I will try to avoid spoilers because I don't know if the recent episodes are out here, but I will say that a situation emerges where they didn't think about how adversarial users might misuse their system. And because it's a decentralized system they were working with, their fictional cryptocurrency, their very company was at stake. That's the level that we're playing at now. If we fail to understand our customers and the way they act, we can lose control of our businesses. We can lose control of our message, or worse. And these crowded markets mean there's little room for design misses before engagement stops. I don't know how many of you were following the recent developments from Snapchat over in the United States, but they redesigned their interface. Unfortunately, the design was led by the CEO. And the designers at Snapchat went and user tested the designs, and they came back to the CEO and they said, "This is not testing well. It's not going well." But they went forward with the release. What's the worst that could happen? Engagement dropped precipitously. For the first time, they saw a shrinking user base, and their stock dropped something like 15% because it wasn't just engagement. They made less money, too. and it scared their marketers away. So not only did they hurt their customers who were using this to interact with their friends, but they hurt their marketers who were funding the entire company to begin with. Now they've redesigned the interface, bringing the designers in. This is the potential cost we're dealing with. And I don't say this to scare you or to make you feel like you're doing something wrong. All we can do is move forward. But the stakes are higher. It used to be that if Microsoft Word's header menu bar went floating, people got frustrated. But now your entire business is at stake if you sort your tabs incorrectly. And the harm our products can cause is greater than ever. This is very sobering, but if you've been following the situation from Uber in the United States, they were piloting their self-driving cars in Arizona, and a vehicle killed a pedestrian. And not only that, when they began to analyze what the problem was, it turned out there were actually human engineering decisions that led to this woman's death. In some cases, not all websites are life or death, but the more powerful our sites get, the broader our reach gets with the cloud, the more unpredictable our experiences become with artificial intelligence, the higher the stakes become. So how do we cope? Everything is horrible. What do we do now? And so I'm here to talk to you about how we cope. And I'm here to propose that we get Opti-pessimistic. We smush optimism and pessimism together and use that as a framework for how we design experiences, whether or not you have designers in the room. So I'm going to share with you 3 techniques I recommend for getting to the heart of these larger, higher stakes problems you may be dealing with. The first is to lead with the hard questions. And I know in startup culture, there's a desire to fail fast, and that's fine when it's not life or death. But I think there's a happy middle ground. We can still be fast without operating at breakneck speed. We can take a week or two to really investigate the potential impact of the work that we do. Because if we don't, no one else will. And that starts by asking ourselves the hard questions up front and being unafraid of potentially proving that our product might not even deserve to exist. So I propose that you start by asking, how does your product fit into the bigger picture? This may feel grandiose, especially if you're starting out with a simple website or a simple mobile app. But then these questions should be easy to answer. Questions like, and we look at it from an opti-pessimistic perspective, both the optimism and the pessimism. So the optimistic questions are things like, does this product include more people than other solutions? Is it solving a previously unsolved problem? Great, that's fantastic. Does it solve a problem in a uniquely beneficial way? Maybe somebody else is already doing this, but our product is really taking a new look at it. But at the same time, you need to ask, how will this make the world worse? And be unafraid of the answers. Are we introducing useless noise into a customer's life, whether through notifications or random objects or IoT devices that people don't necessarily need or want? What customers might we be excluding with our product? Whether that be somebody with a disability or elderly customers who don't understand the complexity of a particular offering. And are we manipulating customers or putting them at risk in any way? Sometimes what we want as a company doesn't really align with what's ethical, particularly when we look at it through a human lens. Is your experience worth the resources you spent to build it? Not to overly pick on Snapchat, but $40 million in unsold spectacles. These, every time we make an IoT device, we consume precious minerals and Earth's resources, some of which never get used again. It's heartbreaking in a way. And in many cases, problems like this can be stopped before they start if we ask tough questions of ourselves and our users, rather than just asking our most vocal supporters what they might want. Another question to ask yourself is, what happens if our success is not the same thing as success for our customers? If we're too successful, how could customers be harmed? We start to talk about addiction to mobile devices. We start to talk about the ways our devices are transforming people's lives. Addiction, stress, broken relationships. If you're working on a social media site, things like Facebook are tearing families apart in some cases. And we also need to ask ourselves, what happens when customers abuse our product? And before, we used to assume there would be some abuse, and this would largely be the department of your security team. But in some cases, especially with artificial intelligence, abuse of your product can change the way your product works. And abuse might not mean breaking the rules. Abuse might mean using your product exactly the way you designed it, but with malintent. So whether it's leaking customer data, malicious mob behaviors, or out-of-context use, using a product in a place it was not meant to be used, how could that change the way the market perceives our product, how a human interacts with our product? I don't know how many of you folks remember the Tay.ai situation. This was a chatbot that Microsoft released back in 2016, I believe. And it was a Twitter bot powered by artificial intelligence that adapted based on the responses people gave it in Twitter. It was designed to be responsive, to be adaptive, to learn by watching Twitter users. That is a risky proposition. This is the friendliest slide I could find about what Tay learned. By creating a spec that defined a chatbot that learned by watching Twitter users, what we ended up with was a violently racist chatbot. Now this, I don't know if you guys can read it in the back, but this one I can actually repeat out loud without feeling like I've embarrassed my parents. The user up at top had messaged to Tay, "You are a stupid machine." And the response from the AI was, "Well, I learned from the best." And then it goes on. "If you don't understand that, let me spell it out for you. I learned from you, and you are dumb too." And that was the nice response. Things got a lot worse. Now, this wasn't breaking the spec of the chatbot. We didn't take the time to ask the tough questions. What happens if success for our customers does not mean success for us? And the larger and more powerful our experiences become, the more we have to ask ourselves about this problem. It's not an unsolvable problem, but it is if you don't see it coming. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the worst case impact our product could have? And this is no longer a quantity discussion. 20 years ago, when we talked about edge cases, we would, because so many problems were unsolved and the impact was low, we'd say, if it only happens to a few customers, it's fine. Maybe we'll get to it later. That's no longer okay. For many of our systems, because they are higher stakes, because they're integral to our customers' lives, it's not about how many customers are impacted. It's about how customers are impacted. Even if 1 in 1,000 customers or 1 in 100,000 customers is impacted by the worst case scenario, if you're Uber and it's an autonomous vehicle, that 1 in 1,000 loses their life. That is not okay. Now, even if you're not working on a life or death device, many of the services we engineer are successful and become integral to our customers' lives. It could be missing a flight if our device fails. It could be missing a loved one's birthday. It could be failing to remind us to pick our kids up at school. There are lots of ways that a worst-case scenario could have genuine harmful impact on a person's life. And so what matters is the proportional impact that worst case has on a customer's day or life, not how many times it happens. What if our feature brings back painful memories? How many of you have seen an awkward Facebook on this day reminder? A couple of folks. This feature wasn't opt-in to start, so it just sort of started showing you memories. But the problem was, and this was before they had different types of reactions, but just as much as the algorithm was likely to surface something that was happy from your past based on likes, it was also likely to remind you of things like, remember that day your parents died? Or, hey, remember this time you lost your job and everybody commented supportively? It's like, yes, everyone commented. That does not mean I want to be reminded of it. And if we just took a couple minutes to think through what the worst case scenario is, we would easily get to the lost loved one scenario. And we could come up with a way to make the algorithm dodge those problems. But when we fail too fast, we hurt people, whether emotionally or physically. What if a conversation is recorded without consent? I know this one was this particular story really captured public interest both in the States and in Europe. And this was a situation where an Amazon Echo in Portland, Oregon, I believe, accidentally recorded a customer's conversation and sent it to a random person on their contact list. Now, if we dig in, it was an edge case of an edge case. When you look at the log, it thought it heard the wake word several times. It happened to trigger the only intent on the Alexa that is capable of doing actual sound recording and transfer. But again, it's not really about how many times that edge case happens. It's the impact it has to a customer's life. And in a world, even if you're not doing this because it's the right thing, in a world where everyone is connected, all it takes is one massive failure and you've got a PR disaster on your hands. So if you need to convince your higher-ups that these sorts of things are the right questions to ask, these are the stories you point to. Now, there are ways I could go on about how this could have also been mitigated by offering better control over a customer's contact list in the Alexa app, but that's a different discussion for another time. But it's important to ask about the context of use and how bad that impact can be. And to go back to the Uber example, according to 2 anonymous sources, Uber's sensors did, in fact, detect the pedestrian as she crossed the street with her bicycle. Unfortunately, the software classified her as a false positive and decided it didn't need to stop for her. That is horrifying. And when you dig in further, there are some folks who are doing the investigation that are saying that there was a decision to turn off the car's ability to stop itself because it made the ride too rough, because false positives were too frequent. That decision implicitly prioritized the software over human life. We must ask ourselves what kind of impact our decisions can have. Explore those tough questions before the cost is too high. So you don't have a designer. So this is all new. You're using AI for the first time. It's overwhelming. There are brainstorming tools that can help you ask these questions. A wonderful tool that was recently released from a company called Artifact in the United States is called the Tarot Cards of Tech. It's a deck of cards that describes customer personas, but they're customer personas not specific to a product, but specific to behaviors, specific to types of customers who might interact with your product if it's successful. This card here, showing the back of the BFFs, or Best Friends Forever card, asks, if 2 friends use your product, how could it enhance or detract from their relationship? And it goes on to ask several other probing questions. This is a great place to start if you're not used to asking these kinds of impact questions. And it's a great way to work if you don't have a designer to help you out. And I'll post a link to this on Twitter later on for those of you who are interested in downloading it. It's a free tool. It doesn't hurt to download it and show it to your team and see what questions it raises. So the second coping strategy I have for you is to explore the human context. And this is a nice transition from this morning's talk from Dave. We talked about the importance of user testing. But before we ever get to prototyping and user testing, we need to understand the context of use that our product will be placed in. Don't build products that your customers don't need, please. And I know, I've been there. You have a wonderful idea. You want to see it succeed. It's hard to let go of those ideas, but I guarantee you, you are all creative individuals. And once you start talking to customers, even if your original idea doesn't work out, you will find other opportunities. You will find things you didn't know, like Dave's example, while working on the train app. There are always hidden answers. There are always hidden opportunities. I reuse this quote shamelessly, and I'm not embarrassed. This is from Jurassic Park, the character Ian Malcolm. tells the creator of Jurassic Park, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think whether they should." And I remind myself of this all the time. Higher stakes demand greater attention to that context of use. Now, it's important that you go to your source, but the most successful products don't actually start by getting an idea, walking up to a customer and saying, "How do you like my idea?" That's a very leading question. And if you want to dig into cognitive psychology, humans want to make you like them. They're going to want to make you feel good about your idea. Most of them. A few won't. But most humans want to establish a relationship and be liked. So if you come and say, "I have this really great idea," they will tell you what you want to hear. Instead, the really successful products start by observing customers where they are without leading them and identifying real problems to solve. So this, I'm going to talk through it. There's no audio here, but I don't know how many of you heard about the Juicero. It was an $800 juicer that came out of Silicon Valley. And it gets better. It's $800. And its primary function is to squeeze packs of already juiced vegetables. And it had an insane press power, 4 tons of squeezing power. And they were only going to offer these packs based on a subscription, who owned the device. But as soon as they put this in the context of use, their customers found that the $700 device was redundant. And you don't trust me. I know your idea. Sometimes you have an idea and it sounds great, but you don't want to be Juicero. It's much better to find out beforehand that your idea is lacking than to release things. And one way to prevent this kind of failure from happening is to move your research beyond surveys. I know, surveys are easier than they ever have been. SurveyMonkey is right there. And isn't it great to just reach out and talk to customers? Yes, but it's also dangerous. And there's a great article on Medium by Erica Hall called On Surveys, and she mentions that surveys are the most dangerous research tool, misunderstood and misused. Yeah, surveys are great because you can quantify the results, but what are you quantifying? Is it an actual quantity that can be counted, or is it some sort of quality that's masquerading as a quantity? It is so easy to make surveys tell us whatever we want to hear. Without quantitative data, all we have is qualitative data, stuff that can't be quantified, but instead describes something, a result, a way a customer operates. Normally, people think this is the domain of universities, but it doesn't have to be scary. There are great tools out there, and I encourage you to consider adding ethnography to your product toolkit, whether you have designers or not. Dr. Sam Ladner, who I worked with on the Echo Look, has this book, Practical Ethnography, and it's written from a corporate perspective on how you can use some of these research tools in your own work to see how customers actually exist and work without polluting those observations with your perspective or your idea. Because in the end, most big data innovations or surveys, those bring the company's needs to the forefront. But ethnographic research brings the customer's perspective to the forefront first. And there's other tools that help you meet your customers where they are. Another tool that I saw and used fairly frequently at Amazon was DScout, where you pay your customers to essentially create diaries for you. You tell them what about their lives you're interested in, and they take little videos, they take photos, they send you little journal entries. It's not as prescriptive as a survey. You get to see how things actually work. And many of these are cloud-based tools that run on your customers' phones. So there are tools out there that can help you. And then, of course, later on in the process, there are a number of great tools to connect you to your customers remotely, like usertesting.com. But find ways to observe rather than question, if you can. Ethnographic research leads to new problems and new solutions. On the Echo Look, we visited customers, didn't tell them we were from Amazon, didn't tell them our idea. We thought that the idea was this camera would exist where a mirror does, and it would help you document your wardrobes. But when we actually talked to customers, we found that urban customers didn't have good mirrors. So there was actually a different use case we hadn't seen, and there was merit in the idea, but we wouldn't have found those things out if we came in and told them what we were thinking. Instead, we just talked to them about their lives. And designers can also help you use storyboards to convey both the customer context you found and to start those really tough discussions about risks. These are a few slides from those Echo Look storyboards where I was trying to paint a picture of what could go wrong in the out-of-box experience that would turn people off the product, like calibration of the image or trying to plug in this device in your closet where you might not have a nearby plug. It's important to have those tough conversations up front. I also encourage you to consider a wide spectrum of users, abilities, and circumstances when you're understanding your human context. Not every customer is an early adopter. This SNL video, Saturday Night Live, about the Amazon Echo Silver is both a love letter to the Echo and a great illustration of how sometimes we fail customers who don't look like ourselves. And there's lots of opportunity in devices like this for customers on the older end of the spectrum. If you're not used to considering customers who are not like you, I suggest starting with Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit. Again, it's entirely free, and it includes tools like these activity cards that help you question the different types of both permanent and situational disabilities that might exclude customers from using your product, and how you can deal with those problems. And again, I'll post one of those links on Twitter for you if you're interested in checking this out. Inclusivity also means asking the right questions. Data seems harmless, but in some ways it can be truly misused, sometimes to the harm of your customers. Like pronouns, for example. As a woman who's a breadwinner for my family, often if a company got my gender, they'll address stuff to my husband, even though I'm the one who's paying the bills. And in some cases, that could actually deny you money. If something's addressed to him and not me, I might not know about your offer. So think about how you're going to use the data you're pulling and whether or not it could be misused. Last but not least, I encourage you to design for the best case, but build for the worst. It's time to look beyond the experience on a single device. Now, I know that many of you are still building for websites and mobile experiences. And traditional site architecture takes the customer's profile, and that's usually available in the cloud. But information about the customer's state is usually stored locally on whatever device the task was started on. A device-agnostic architecture takes that state and moves it up to the profile level, accessible from any device. And this is key when you think your customers are going to be transitioning between many different types of devices. Spoiler alert, they will be. Maybe not now, but in the future. And this is the kind of thing a designer can help you see up ahead and make architecture decisions that will save you tons of money in the long run. Go beyond the happy path by enabling your customer state to transcend devices, because the Internet of Things and our multiple device landscape is here to stay. Don't think pixels, think information architecture, transitions between devices, and the content you show on individual devices. And assume that your experiences are going to be interrupted. The Echo Show changed everything for us on the Alexa voice design team because the Echo was a single task system. It did not have multitasking. Whereas the Echo Show, once you have a GUI, suddenly you could have multiple tasks going at once. And we had to completely change how we thought about the way tasks worked. And this is something a customer can help, or a designer can help you with. Seek out and conquer your experience cliffs. And what I mean by cliffs is that gap between devices, when someone's transitioning from their phone to your desktop or from a voice-controlled device to their mobile phone. That's usually where failures happen. That's usually where you lose people. If you can find a way to smooth those gaps, that's going to be where the real differentiation is for the next generation of experiences, is the businesses that look and conquer the cliffs. So design an experience that can scale across devices. Make optimistic assumptions like your customers will want to interact with you on a ton of devices. Even if you don't support it at first, engineer it so you can. Assume you can track customers over time. Assume that you'll want to scale beyond websites at some point, and ask yourselves how your architecture would change. And make some pessimistic assumptions, too. Your core scenarios will be interrupted, and how do they span devices? Assume that your telemetry won't be useful for a long time, so your experience has to stand on its own. And assume that some of your customers will not have access to that emerging technology. And also remember that your customer's relationship with your product is far more than first run. Make some optimistic assumptions, like your customer will want to use your product for a year. How has it changed after 300 days? How do you avoid giving them the same first run experience over and over again? and make some pessimistic assumptions, like customers won't stay with you without some kind of onboarding story. And remember that if AI is a part of your product, design for AI requires embracing uncertainty. More attention must be given to the error cases than the happy paths. And just as a quick example here, if I'm designing for a voice interaction, the happy path is very easy. Set a timer for 15 minutes. Great. But reality is much worse. And when you're dealing with natural language, one form of artificial intelligence, you have to account for incomplete asks, like set a timer, situations where we couldn't understand part of what you said, and the reality about how human speech works, where it's more like, Alexa, set a timer for 5 minutes. There are all sorts of unhappy paths we have to design for. And now, this is uncertainty from the human involved in the equation, but there's just as much uncertainty involved from the AI you're working with. So you need to build a system that helps you respond to surprises. You can't predict how AI will work, and that's actually a huge problem about the AI industry in general, is they're essentially black boxes. They can't tell us why they do the things they do. Most AI can't explain itself. This is an example image, of course, from the Deep Dream project over at Google, where computer vision algorithms sort of developed a sort of memory. We can't predict this behavior. All we can do is prepare to respond to the unexpected. That might mean processes or triage at your company. It might mean an easy way to roll out changes. But think about that. If your AI does something unexpected, how will you deal with that? So I encourage you to adopt Opti-pessimism in your process, whether or not you have designers who are working with you. Reevaluate that process, and if you do have designers, involve them in pre-production. It's not just about GUI. To the point Dave was making earlier, we can help save you money up front, whether telling you that we're making the wrong project and pointing us towards an actual customer problem, or helping guide you towards the most likely scenarios for use so that we can make smart system architecture decisions that scale well. If you don't have that, and the other thing we can do is help you make your process adaptive and help you figure out how to design for the unexpected, even if that's just internally. If you don't have access to design, work on incorporating customer outreach and some of these tools, these ideation tools, into your own process. And remember these 3 metrics for how you can change your process. Be Opti-pessimistic. It's even more important if you don't have a designer to prevent some of these high-stakes failures. Lead with the hard questions, like what is the primary problem we're solving? What's the riskiest part of our project? What are our blind spots, and what's the worst thing that can happen? Explore that human context and ask ourselves, where will this product be used? How will it be used? How will our customers feel if we fail or if they fail? And who are we excluding when we put this project together? And then design for the best case and build for the worst. Architect an experience that allows your customers to interact with you on multiple platforms, even if you don't start out that way. And think through that long-term engagement if you are successful. But remember, your customers will get interrupted. Remember that you need to design for what happens when things go wrong. It's more important than ever. And create those tools that let you respond to emerging customer feedback. The glass is now half empty and half full. Be Opti-pessimistic. May your cup runneth over.
Okay, thank you so much, Cheryl.